Just Stop Oil. Alex, you're very welcome to Talk TV this afternoon.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
You failed, haven't you? Because Rishi Sunak says he's not going to stop oil, he's going to drill for more of it.
Yeah, it's quite sad that he said this. I mean, Just Stop Oil would have stopped overnight if he didn't say it. There would be no more disruption, but of course now we have to continue because we have to constantly make sure that there's no more oil and gas, in line with what Lord Debon has said, who is the previous chair of the Environment Committee, in line with what the United Nations are saying. He said it's moral and economic badness to introduce new oil and gas, in line with what the Cross-Parliamentary Environment Audit Committee has said. This is what everybody is screaming out for.
But Alex, what are you going to do? Just on that point, actually, on supply, Rishi Sunak says he can get to net zero by 2050, but you've got to have supply. You've got to have fuel for people to live and work and travel, and that has to come, in his mind anyway, from oil and fossil fuels, but even to assist the transition to net zero. Do you not see his argument?
No, I don't. You do need energy, for sure. We cannot just cut off oil. We cannot cut off oil overnight, but we have 8 years of oil in reserves, and we need to start that transition. Opening up these new oil and gas...
You think it can be done in 8 years? We can stop using fossil fuels in 8 years? So it's Just Stop Oil, but not for 8 years. Is that what you're saying?
It's always been Just Stop New Oil. That's the demand of Just Stop Oil. The government's own reports say that the average time to get oil and gas from the North Sea when granting these licenses is 28 years. We're not going to see any benefit for this oil and gas for another 28 years. I don't know about you, but I can't wait that long. My energy bills are through the roof, and most of Southern Europe is on fire.
But Southern Europe isn't on fire. Southern Europe, part of it is quite hot, but it's not there, and there have been wildfires.
There are wildfires all over Greece. Yeah,
well, they're not all over Greece. They're in part of Greece, and they're in part of other countries as well. And many of them are now under control, and the temperatures are going down. So, I mean, this idea of Southern Europe being on fire is not true, is it?
There's a lot of wildfires all over Southern Europe, including Greece, Italy, and many other countries. And in the same way that in New York, just a couple of months ago, because of wildfires in Canada, people couldn't leave their homes. 10 million people couldn't leave their homes because they couldn't breathe that air. Are you really telling me that we're not in a climate emergency when we're looking at thousands and thousands of British tourists not able to get back because of wildfires and roads?
Well, they got back eventually. I mean, obviously it's a massive inconvenience.
So you have no sympathy for these tourists?
I do have sympathy for the tourists, but I've actually more sympathy for the people who actually live there, who have to put up with this, and the people who work in the tourist industry. But you presumably would not have a tourist industry because you don't want people flying there in the first place.
What's going to impact the tourist industry is the fact that the climate crisis is making it almost impossible to go out to these places abroad.
Not true. Roads had between 10 and 15% of the island of Rhodes was on fire. There were wildfires there, absolutely.
And it was horrible.
Yeah, of course.
And I wouldn't. It's going to get worse.
And I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. But 85% of the island was absolutely fine for people to visit.
Well, every year, the climate crisis is going to make these temperatures worse. Next year, it might be 25% of Rhodes that's on fire. The year after, it might be 35%.
You don't know that. That's just off the top of your head, Alex. You're just making that up.
No, it's not off the top of my head. It's the fact that temperatures are rising, and every single year the climate crisis is going to make things worse unless we take action against it.
So the action you would take against it would be to kill the tourist industry in Southern Europe, in places like Rhodes.
Oh, you're putting words in my mouth.
Well, I'm asking you, would it be to say that people can't go there because they shouldn't be able to take flights?
No, I'm not saying that. I am saying what we need is renewable energy. What we need is cheaper public transport. What we need is homes to be insulated so that all of the energy we put into our houses doesn't just leak into the outside air. We have a lot of the solutions. All of them are very well laid out in the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. In the final segment, all the solutions are laid out. We just need to follow them, and they're not doing that. Instead, they're trying to get to net zero by burning oil. That doesn't make sense.
But we're still
we're not going to see any good effect for the next 28 years. It's a long time.
But we certainly need oil, don't we? We need to get to even if we got to 2050, Rishi Sunak says that even a quarter of our output, a quarter of what we will need is still oil and gas. And if you don't have it from here in Britain, well, you're going to need it from other countries, and it's going to actually have a carbon footprint in terms of getting it there. Just hold on a second. Places like Russia, where we have, okay, it's only a small amount, but other countries as well, where actually the price will stay high and we will have a carbon footprint actually getting here because we need to use it.
Peter, that's not true. At the last government auction, renewables were 9 times cheaper than gas. 9 times cheaper. And solar and wind power can be built in a matter of months as opposed to 28 years. Of course we can start this transition. Why would we wait? It's cheaper. It's better for the everyday person. We get cleaner air. You're less likely to get 40-degree heat waves every year. Why wouldn't we have renewables?
Why do you use the phrase the climate crisis? Why is that a phrase that you use a lot? A lot of our viewers and listeners aren't too happy with that.
I mean, have you seen what's happening in roads? What's happened in New York earlier? The Canadian wildfires. This is getting worse every single year.
A lot of them were started by arsonists as well.
No, they're not.
Well, they were. There's proof to show that many of them in southern Europe, certainly in roads, were started by arsonists. So I mean, it's not just the dryness.
Was the 40-degree temperature last summer here in the UK, was that started by arsonists?
No, I'm not saying it was for a second. I would never argue that. But in terms of, I mean, we are top of the G7 in terms of what we're doing. The UK is 1% of the global emissions. I mean, what you're advocating would take huge change, would take huge economic change, would take huge change in the way that people live. And actually, if you look at the statistics and the polling, about 70% of people say that they want to get to net zero. They support that policy. But 55% of people say they don't want to pay for it. They don't want to have the huge inconvenience that they would need to have in their lives. Things like, you know, we're talking about the war on the motorists today, low traffic neighbourhoods, ULEZ and so on. But that's something you support. How are you going to convince people, Alex?
Peter, as you say, a lot of people want more action on the climate crisis. I don't know if you heard me. Renewables are 9 times cheaper than gas, which is, and oil is more expensive than that. 9 times cheaper. This is not going to cost the everyday taxpayer a lot of money. The UK led the Industrial Revolution. Now we need a green industrial revolution, okay? We have to make this change. We have to come ahead of it. Why wouldn't we want to do that? I'm talking about cleaner air. I'm talking about cheaper public transport.
Yes, but,
I'm talking about warmer homes in the winter.
Okay, Alex, but if you go to renewables, for example, one way to go to renewables, which some people or to be greener, which some people do, is to use encouragement to get an electric car. We have seen electric cars cost between £20,000 and £30,000 often, or a lot more than that. A lot of people can't afford that. There are people, I've spoken to numerous people over the past few days who say the ultra-low emissions zone charges in London mean that they will have trouble working. They'll have trouble getting to work and paying to get to work. A lot of people see your agenda and see the green agenda and just see cost. They don't see benefit.
First of all, this is not my agenda. These are just my opinions. And I've never said anything about electric cars. Electric cars, I mean, people can do as they want.
Maybe I can ask you about electric cars. Do you think, I mean, you accept that the majority of journeys in this country, factually, are made by car. Public transport should be better. I think we can probably both agree on that. But I mean, I was talking to Sir Robert Goodwill in North Yorkshire. He's not living in London most of the week anyway. He's in North Yorkshire, where he says, you know, there are only a few buses a day in various places. The public transport infrastructure just isn't there.
That's horrible.
Okay.
Yeah, I heard that, and that's horrible. So let's get some more buses. That's an obvious solution, right? Let's make train travel subsidized. Right now, we're subsidizing the oil and gas industry with £236 million every single week. Why are we using that to subsidize trains?
Where are you getting that figure, Alex?
That figure is from the UK government's own reports about what's happening in the North Sea.